everyone, and you are welcome to the Mating PFM Dialogue Series. I want to say good morning and welcome to all of you. This PFM Dialogue Series is in partnership with the National Resource Governance Institute, and we are coming to you live from the Alisa Hotel. We are live online via Zoom and Facebook. Just go to @PFM Tax Africa on Facebook to follow this event live as well. And you can also look on the online platform. You will see how to join via Zoom as well. So feel free to join us and also send your questions through. So today's discussion will center on the topic, the 2021 budget, what next? Former Finance Minister Seth Terkper will be leading these discussions, but we are happy to have all of you here. My name is Jifa Bampo. I'm your moderator for the session today. Some housekeeping issues before we begin. We ask that you please put all your phones on silent so that it doesn't disturb the program as we move ahead. It also disturbs the machines as well. So please put the phones on silent. Also, there isn't a fire drill here today. So if you do hear a fire drill, then it means that there is a fire alarm and it will be real. And it will mean that we will exit through the left door on this side. There's also another emergency exit ahead of you. So just watch out for that safety moment as well. Feel free to tweet at PFM Tax Africa, and that is our Twitter handle. And on Facebook, the event is live. Feel free to drop your questions there as well as in the chat segment on Zoom. At this time, let me welcome Novan Akwa-Hayford to give the welcome statement. Please, a round of applause. Thank you.
Good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen. All protocol observed. The PFM Tax Africa Dialogue Series is an initiative by the PFM Tax Africa Network, and this is to promote relevant conversations about public finance management in Ghana. Ladies and gentlemen, the series will aim to encourage and facilitate apolitical exposition on fiscal policies, revenue mobilization, resource exploitation, and management of the national resource that we have, looking at the expenditure patterns of government. The vision is for PFM Tax Africa to hold this dialogue almost every quarter, each dialogue focusing on pertinent issues of relevance to management of the Ghanaian economy and the management of the country's resources, especially when you look at the fiscal space. Let me just remind you that Ghana, since independence, have resulted into going to the IMF all the time if we have had issues or slippages like high budget deficit. You look at the debt burdens that we have, revenue shortfalls, and also look at the high taxes that we have to introduce because of the shortfalls in our revenue. But this time, if you look at the situation that we find ourselves, ladies and gentlemen, we don't know what will be the direction for government as far as what is happening to us. The aim for organizing this program is to provoke conversations around the potential of Ghana taking the bold step of correcting the fiscal gap which has been created, one by pointing us to the very areas in the 2021 budget which has the medium-term budget estimates found between the 2021 budget that we have. Again, let me say that critical to this is to come up with some kind of solutions which would help, the managing of the economy. Ladies and gentlemen, this program is being organized in partnership or with one of our great partners, which is the Natural Resource Governance Institute, the NRGI. We are organizing this program in collaboration with them. We are hoping that when our main speaker mounts the podium, you would listen attentively and just follow the conversation. As Jifa did indicate, we would encourage those of you who are on Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, You can drop your questions. You can also send us all the information that you also have. We want to provoke this conversation, and we hope that this will be something that will go on to help us manage the economy of this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Novan, for giving us the welcome address. So as many of you know, the 2021 budget was read earlier by the Minister for Parliamentary Affairs, Oseiche Mensah-Bonsu, on behalf of the Finance Minister. And there were many issues there that were raised in terms of revenue mobilization, also concerns about the domestic and external debt, as well as how we refinance our deficit. Those are some of the issues we'll be talking about today, but based on what lies ahead. So let's not focus on what has already happened. As we follow this presentation, let's look at what lies ahead and provide some views as to what we can deal with going into the future. At this point now, I'll introduce our lead discussant, who is obviously well known to many of you, but still important to share who and what he stands for. So our lead discussant is a chartered accountant and politician who served as the 17th Minister for Finance and Economic Planning of Ghana from 2013 to 2017. Please note that prior to that, he was a deputy minister as well for quite a while before becoming full minister. So he was minister during the John Mahama administration. Between July 1999 and February 2009, our lead discussant held various positions, last as a senior economist in the Fiscal Affairs Department of the IMF. Before joining the IMF, our lead discussant worked as the National VAT Coordinator and Deputy Commissioner in the National Revenue Secretariat of the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning and Revenue Agencies in Ghana. He's played a key role in the introduction of the value-added tax in Ghana many years ago. He consults widely and has done so for the likes of the IMF, for the Harvard Institute of International Development, the African Development Bank, and the UN Committee of Tax Experts. Our lead discussant is also an author. I've always said that one of the ways to immortalize yourself is to write a book and have your name in it. And so he's written a book on VAT, a VAT handbook by Thomson Reuters in 2011. He continues to research and write widely. And today's dialogue is just another approach to promote his knowledge and also to encourage all of us to pay attention to issues relating to the economy and how it impacts our country. He's a graduate of the University of Cape Coast and holds an MPA from the Harvard University's Kennedy School. Please welcome former Finance Minister Seth Terkper. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jifa. And you are welcome. And an acknowledgement to NRGI, who are collaborating with us specifically on account of what the Petroleum Revenue Management Act and our use of oil revenues, portend or hold as a different way to answering some of the questions that we have, for today. Let me also acknowledge the African Development Institute of the African Development Bank. Some of the presentation is work which the Institute is doing, which I'm involved in defining a PFM framework that will be used by African countries, particularly the middle-income countries of Africa, to manage their, to manage their fiscal, very well. And this is important because these are the countries that are also losing concessional financing and grants. And and who are also in the market and borrowing at very expensive rates. So it means that domestic resource mobilization, expenditure management, and debt management becomes very, very important, for these countries. So another acknowledgement is to ASEP, which also has, interest in the use of natural resources. We always say we need to use our natural resources differently, and this is what we attempted to do with oil. If you compare it with our use of, gold, cocoa, bauxite, that's the minerals, in general. I note that this is the 10th anniversary of, the PRMA, which was, and the export of oil. Actually, the PRMA came in ahead of, the first export of crude oil in 2011. So we are at the 10th anniversary. PIAC has been doing some work. So we hope to see more of those. As has been said, when a country gets to this point where we are now, in the past, we have resorted to, the IMF, which many developing countries do, both because of its expertise, which it has. I think often we focus on the IMF in terms of, its work in austerity, that is doing difficult fiscal corrections, which does not make it too popular and dear itself. But behind the scenes are the technical assistance departments that help our GRAs, our controllers, our Bank of Ghana's, the real sector, together with the World Bank. These are lesser known, and it was mentioned that, in the interest of disclosure, I did work with the Revenue Administration Division of the Fiscal Affairs Department, of the IMF, and this is the work, that they do best. In the absence of that, like the middle-income countries and advanced countries, then you have to come up with your own homegrown policy, if you get into crisis. Like COVID is a good example in the past global financial crisis, or our own domestic crisis, sometimes drought, bushfires, and other things which doom so, that is absent the disruption in gas supply from Nigeria. That also requires that, you do your own internal correction. So as a middle-income country, we attempted at the Mahama administration to do what we call the policy support instrument, which doesn't come with borrowing, but comes with collaboration with the IMF. But the single spine under the homegrown, that gave rise to the homegrown policy, which was used to negotiate the IMF, program, the ECF. And that is because financing is a very critical part. And when you have to restructure your debt, and when you have to, provide immediate injection into the economy, it is only the fund which is the credible source for many developing countries. And that's why we see many developing countries going, to the IMF. This presentation, let me make 2 points, is focused heavily on the fiscal. And that is because we do not want to overstretch ourselves. And even the coverage of the fiscal, is a lot. So we'll try as much as possible, to go through it. Secondly, we do not want to raise expectations. We are not proposing absolute solutions, or, I would say we are not coming out with solutions. And that is because having been in government, there are things which, after the budget, there may have been developments which you do not know about, and we have also had differences. You remember the parallel, numbers, where we took issue and some correction has to be done. So it's only the government that knows the true insights, of the problem posed. I believe that the 2021 budget gives a very fair idea of where we stand. We all know, at least with respect to deficit, which increased within months from 4.5% or 4.7% to 13%, including the bailout and other costs. And then debt, which rose sharply from 57, close to 57%, at the end of 2016 to nearly 80%. By now we have crossed 80%. If you add the first quarter borrowing and the bond that took place, recently. So this is the context. And these are when you have come to near death distress, or you are death distressed, then it calls for, either homegrown or, assistance from the multilateral, notably the World Bank, IMF, and the African Development Bank. So what we want to do is, there has been a lot of discussion of where we are or where we were, what gave rise to it. We took part in some of it. We want to see what is the potential going forward. And there's the 2022 to 2024, medium-term numbers that the government, has in the budget. That's what we are going to use. We are going to use official numbers. Does it give us, a way out? Because in the absence of a dedicated program to do the correction, then the only official information available to you is what is in the budget. We do not want to depart from that. We may have commentaries on it and others, but that is the official position. So I want to put this, in very clear, context so that, So this is what I've been saying, that 2021 budget has the midterm, which is 2022 to 2024. That's going to be, what we are going to use. 2020 is very significant because it came with an attempt to virtually, in some quarters, blame almost everything on COVID. It may be facetious, but we also, argue strongly that there were fiscal gaps, explicitly 2.5 to 3% when we went for the RCF loan. But if you do some corrections, which we believe needs to be done, then the fiscal gap was as big as 7%. So if you add the COVID 2.5 to the 4.5%, which government said it was doing in the original 2020 budget, that gives you about 8%. And if you ended up at 13%, the difference is 7. So we believe that we come close, to, saying that there is something else for which we need to be candid, and we'll discuss some of that. We've mentioned debt and deficit. The problem we have is that as a revenue source, our revenues are heavily earmarked, right? And therefore, often is very inflexible. Are we doing enough on expenditures, interest, and compensation in particular, which has attracted the attention of all of us because it is completely consuming our tax revenues. In fact, it's about 110% of the tax revenues. And therefore, we are dependent on borrowing to complete paying interest and compensation, whatever is left of it, to pay, goods and services, that is running government offices, ministries, departments, and agencies, to schools and all those, and then capital budget. All of these are from loan. And then we are also dependent on loan now, to pay for past loans, right? That is what so that is the meaning. That's the meaning of saying that interest and compensation has taken, all our tax revenues. And when you add even non-tax revenue and grants, it comes very close to 100%. And that is gross. So this is the context, and I hope that we are putting it in very simple terms, for us to understand. This is the fiscal framework. Let's go through it quickly so that we can follow the discussion. Every budget has a revenue expenditure. That is part A, on a cash basis, money coming in and then money going in as expenditure. Often your expenditure is higher, so you come to a deficit, right? Now remember, because the first part is cash, you have not added arrears. Arrears of contracts, arrears owing to school feeding, arrears owing, you haven't added that in the first portion. So in the second portion, you add arrears. Here the terminology changes. Instead of budget deficit, you normally have fiscal balances. But you can say it's budget deficit 1 before arrears, and then budget deficit 2 after you have added, arrears. And therefore that will give you budget deficit what? 2, right? After you have added arrears. Then occasionally when you have bushfires, the crisis which I was talking about, when you have excessive subsidy which you haven't paid, when you have others, single spine or COVID costs, then you have something called exceptional arrears. They are exceptional because they come in, they are not normal, but they come in periodically and then you clear them. Also, sometimes you can have income, like HIPIC revenue. Also, now we don't have any HIPIC revenue by the time they came in. So these are exceptional. One of the differences that we have had with this government, the current government, is that these exceptional expenditures, which past governments had put in the budget, right? You can see that we are putting in the framework, which means that it's in a budget. They decided to put it as a footnote. And that was part of the beginning of the problems, because when you take it out, then it means that your fiscal balance tray or your budget deficit tray, we have 2, which is the normal arrears. Your 3 is the same as your 2. You are taking out the exceptional, but it is there to be financed, right? Wherever you do it, whether you do it outside the budget, you pay it outside budget to give good numbers or whatever, you have to finance it. This is where the fundamentals expose you, right? So what we have seen, you recall, is that we have had very good or solid deficit numbers. Then all of a sudden, debt became a big issue. Debt popped up. And then it started accelerating, 70%, whatever. And now we are above 80%. It has to be financed. And this is what, governance, refer to, Bank of Ghana, let me just say, refer to as calculating the deficit on a narrow basis or what? On a broad basis. On a narrow basis, you are taking certain things out. On a broad basis, you must add everything, which has been our budget tradition. Once you have amortization, that is, you borrow to finance the deficit, you have old debt, which is debt repayment or amortization. And then you come out with the amount that you are adding to the public debt. So this is the framework that we are going to follow. And this is the budget framework. If we understand this, we can follow every budget, particularly the appendices to the budget. It's only a matter of details. It gives a lot of information, a lot of details. And one day we'll do a dialogue series on the budget framework, particularly for our financial journalists, so that, we demystify, the budget. This is something I try to do while I was in office. I held periodical monthly briefings. I think we need to demystify what is in the budget, so that it's important that we can all follow. It is for our benefit. So we need to understand it, particularly financial journalists. So this is another series we will do on this framework. This is something I teach, my students, particularly the postgraduate students. So you can see the framework being repeated. This is our budget. The numbers that are our budget. The revenue, expenditure, deficit, right? So you see that is our first fiscal deficit 1. Then you come to arrears. It gives you fiscal deficit 2. Then you have your fiscal balance, including arrears and discrepancy. Discrepancy are, Now you see that we have to add bailout separately, right? And that is what was being shown as a footnote. Immediately you add it, then you are going to the old way of calculating, the deficit. So this is our budget, from 2013 to date. 2013 because the rebasing, because we use GDP, this is a percentage of GDP, not nominal. Because we did a rebasing starting from 2013, it becomes objective. It also looks political, but this is the primary basis is because of the GDP. Now, you will notice, is there a lighter here, please? You will notice, if you look at the yellow line, horizontal, you see something occurring. You see a 2.3. Now, you see that 2.3. Now, you will see that it did not have an antecedent and a precedent, right? Before it, there was no line, 0, 0, 0. After it is 0, 0, 0. This is what we've been calling about the offset. Remember, 2017, it was said that the NDC had left, Mama administration had left, a deficit of 10.3, which is the 8.1 you see there, right? Why was it not, spread so that it can be paid like we did with the single spine? That is because it was offset. Now, when you see below the 8.1, you see another 1.3, right? That 1.3, you can see is close to the 2.3. That is an offset. And it leaves you with 1. So what was actually carried forward was 1. So the actual deficit for 2017 was not 2016 was not 10.3, it's 6.1. But we're told that a fiscal consolidation occurred in 2017. If it occurred in 2017 and the adjustments were in 2016, then was it the Mahama administration that did it? Remember, these numbers were no longer under the control of the previous administration. This is the first problem that we had, the offset, right, which did not repeat itself. So this, if you recall, this was also the 7 billion, which was referred to the Auditor General, which the Auditor General said 5 billion was disallowed. You see, only 2 billion was carried forward. What happened? They were paid. So this is the first problem. We are looking at where the problems are. The second one is the bailout cost. And the thing about the bailout cost, you can see in the bill last but one line, is that they did not occur every year, despite having ESLA. Despite we having ESLA, they did not occur every year. They were sporadic. So when we come to the graph, you will see that the arrears and the bailout cost, that's the deep brown, occurs occasionally. And anytime they occurred, you see the deficit, which is the line, going down, deepening, becoming, becoming very heavy. And we'll come back to this. It explains the difference in the 2020 budget. The cumulative effect is what happened in the 2020 budget and the revised 2020 budget, which included COVID, which I was saying has two components. That is the COVID and the non-COVID. So if we are going to find solutions, one is systemic, right? It's the result of bailouts showing ESLA, but not showing, the bailout costs. Energy is not even part of the bailouts in many of the bailouts that are shown, right? That is also left out. There was an attempt to put it, as added to amortization. So you have, these as the factors, which led to the cumulative increase in the non-COVID increase from 4.7% to 13% if you include the bailout, 11% if you exclude the bailout. So we keep insisting until we are corrected that there are two components of the problem on hand, right? Because COVID with vaccine hopefully will go like many crises, but we'll be left with how to find a solution. And the question therefore is, the picture going forward, you can see the deficit is not the block lines, they are the lines that are below. It's supposed to be improving, right? But towards the end, it has improved and gone up because they do not include, the last 2 years do not include bailout costs. The fun thing is that the bailout costs will last. It does not include energy, the energy bailout, right? If energy costs are going to be zero in 2023 and 2024, how come was ESLA increase? How come do we have all those other levies increase, right? And we're told they will lapse at the end of what? 2024. In the case of ESLA, it has been, the bond is actually 10 years, sometimes 20 years. So how and why are we raising money in anticipation of a debt which is supposed to, in any event, then it should have lasted up to 2022, right, if you are going to show. So this is where we are asking whether this projection that is being made there, right, are we really going to hit the 5%, right, or like the prior numbers, immediately they surface, then we realize that we have another problem. And these are what we think should go into, a program. Okay. So these are the main causes. I mentioned the offset, right? You can also see from the earlier graphs, you see you have percentage of, will come to the revenue. But you see that the percentage numbers are virtually the same. The last time we hit, revenue hit, anything 17.5% was in 2015. We have not hit 17%. But more importantly, the numbers that have been published, if you express them as a percentage of the GDP that was given to us, none hits 17%. Yet we are told that as a middle income country, and this is the goal, we should be raising tax revenue, not total revenue, of 20%. Here, our total revenue is not even up to 20%, let alone the tax revenue. The highest, again, you can see, okay, we'll come to that later on. So that's the first problem. That's the stagnant revenue. But you have the expenditure also being high. It's supposed to be going down, you can see in the last few years. But we have already said that if you take this to be expenditure and you look at it as you come down, then you will see that after you add arrears and the 000 last bet 1, you can see in the blue, the 3 zeros that you have there at the end of the year. If there is any bailout, if there is any exceptional cost that arises, it means that you cannot meet that deficit. And that means that our deficit will remain high. Okay, so this is like a conclusion based on the numbers that we may not be doing enough in either raising revenue, right, or cutting expenditure, right, to be able to, meet the targets that we have set. The numbers are what we are talking about, right? And then where still, it doesn't include, you can see that the arrears are much lower. We'll come to all of this later on. I just want to set the stage. So we have, in summary, offsets, stagnant and declining revenues, but you have expenditures that are high, mostly on consumption. We all know the numbers by now, mostly on consumption. You can see that the amount we are allocating for capital is very narrow, and we are borrowing to even pay loan. Exceptional expenditure, I've said it, we are pushing it into footnotes. And because of this, the multilateral institutions like the IMF and the World Bank and the rating agencies started making their own adjustments to our numbers. You remember that it was Moody's that first predicted, apart from the internal predictions, that we would reach 80%, of debt. They said it back in October, thereabout, November, right? So this again shows the adjustments. So to get a good picture, you can see that we have the fiscal balance, but you have to make adjustments for the exceptional costs, and then you can see the adjustments which the IMF made in the Article 4 in 2019. As far back as 2019, the IMF started to make adjustments. That's with the blue we painted. Where we said our deficit was 3.7, they said no, it's 7. Where we said it's 4.7, they said no, it's 7.5. That's if you add. They use the expression headline deficit and whatever for the first time. This terminology was increased. So ladies and gentlemen, what we are saying is that if we want to see the prospects going forward and whether the budget, has what it takes to bring the country back, less borrowing and whatever, it seems that it is based on certain assumptions which appear to be shaky, right? So the other issue we have is non-compliance with the PRMA. The PRMA was designed to provide stabilization for the budget. We have a very good example. When we hit COVID, we took $250 million straight from the stabilization fund. That was the first money we took, right? In 2015, when we had the fall in crude oil prices, we took about $250 million, but it was Ghana cedis, not dollars, right? So you just had the exchange rate. Now, we are not putting money. You remember we lowered the cap twice, and so not much is being left in the stabilization fund. And that means that in the next 4 years, if anything should hit us, there's no petroleum revenues flowing into the stabilization fund. And the cap was not restored during the budget. And this is where the interest, of the natural resource people, come in. It is something to do with the budget. It's something to do with the soundness of the budget. We also had a heritage fund, which we attempted to take out to meet, recurrent expenditure. There was resistance to this. Then we have the infrastructure fund also from oil revenue, so that we can do commercial, loans for commercial projects like Terminal 3, MPS, SEMA, and others which we initiated, from the oil revenue, because we all say that the oil revenue is used for small projects. So the importance of the infrastructure fund was to enable us to do the big infrastructure which can pay for itself. That also is dry. In fact, there were no flows, right? Then we used the sinking fund for the first time to pay off $550 million of the first sovereign bond, which was issued during the Kufuor administration, His Excellency Kufuor's administration, right? That has also, virtually ceased. There's some refinancing and debt payment that is taking place on the domestic front. But we will see from the debt numbers when we come there that it is not deep enough. So this should be concern, how we are using the oil revenue. Because remember what I said, the PRMA was designed to tackle issues and problems that we have had with the budget, right? And so that is a very important question on the anniversary, important anniversary of, So we're saying again, repetition, we either do a homegrown or as we couldn't succeed with the PSI, you may be forced into a fund program. And if we do not have a reasonable homegrown, then it means that, we are stuck, in a sense with with the situation, and we may not be out. So now, is revenue a solution? Again, we know the past. We said 17.8 and 13.4 for the last 8 years. That was the best we could achieve in 2015. That is total revenue against, total tax revenue. Are we anywhere near? Towards the end, 2022, 23, and 24, total revenue, if you express as a percentage of the GDP, is 16.7, 16.8, 16.9, not up to the 17.8, nearly 18%. Similarly, 13.4 tax revenue, we come close. So I heard somebody in GRA saying there's a tall order. Yes, this is what it means. GRA is supposed to be at the sub-Saharan African average of about 17 or 18% for for low middle income countries, or even for low income countries. As a middle income, we should be at 20%. You can see from the numbers that tax revenue is nowhere near even 14%, for the future, let alone be at the African where Kenya and others are at 17%, before we even move, to 20% as a middle income country. So it means that the government's own numbers show that we need to do more, revenue, if we are to get out of the woods. If revenue is going to be a solution, to the program, the others are non-tax revenue and the rest. You can see that the dominant, so you can see that why we are focusing on total revenue and total tax revenue. Those total tax revenue contributes the largest, to total revenue. And therefore, issues like what are we doing with the VAT, it repeats itself. What are we doing with VAT? What are we doing with corporate income tax? Those are the main sources of revenue. If we keep disturbing them, if we keep blocking input tax credit for VAT, raising corporate income tax instead of strengthening collection and the rest, right? You can see that, when you go back, you can see it hasn't made, those measures have not brought in, any significant change, and going forward, because what we have there is all the way to 2024. You can see that it's not bringing in, much, change. So revenue, unless we intensify our efforts, may not be, part of the solution. These are all the taxes, and you can see. Now you can see something happening that even ESLA is about equal to the grants. And this is the problem that the middle income African countries are facing. When you become middle income, you begin to lose grants. So you see grants, the highest level of grants we got, I believe, was 2015. And that was because the World Bank withheld budget support until we went into the IMF program. And so immediately we went into the IMF program and they released it, the grants, shot up. But it didn't repeat itself, right? So this is the structure, we can't rely much on grant as a middle income country. We can't rely much on debt forgiveness. So we have to intensify our own domestic collection, and move the numbers up. These are our main revenue sources: corporate income tax, VAT, excise. These three, together with import duty, are the ones that give us, the most revenue. You can see that the corporate income tax is hovering. It moved up from 2.3, then went up, after the retention of the, the temporary taxes, the corporate element, and then also the increase in the personal income tax, rate corporates and others, some intensification of collection by GRA. But you can see that the VAT, which used to outstrip it because of the disturbance we have with the VAT, has become almost equal, with the corporate income tax. The VAT is no longer, and the VAT is the engine. It's no longer, the vibrant and the buoyant, we say, that's the word we use, source of revenue, for the nation, because it is almost at par now with corporate income tax. The reason is that corporate income tax has all the incentives that we give, tax holidays and, all the things that, there are more of it, but the VAT is supposed to have very little. It's just exemptions for education, health, the basic things. And so supposed to bring in, more revenue. But if it has become flat, then we need to examine some of the policies, removal of the national health insurance, GET fund, and all those things from the VAT base. They are not yielding anything. Why? Because they are blocking input tax credit, increasing prices. And so you are likely to be having tax evasion and avoidance, taking place, quite seriously. That may not be the only, of course, the economy also has something to do, the current stage that we have. So you can see again, your total tax revenue, and if you put it in graphic forms, you can see that you see the peak in 2015, it has not been equaled. It was only the 2020 budget, the one that had a low deficit, that was supposed to bring enough revenue. It couldn't, so we lowered it. But this is also partly on account of, COVID. And then going forward, it does not improve the current situation. The current situation is always to your left. So if we are looking forward, then we need to improve the situation. In the case of revenue, go up. In the case of expenditure, cut down some expenditures, right? So in summary, instability of policy, like blocking the VAT, of course the rebasing also is, we shouldn't put all of this, on the doorstep of GRA. Yeah, because when you rebase, remember you increase your GDP, right? And therefore your revenue as a percentage of GDP goes down. Your debt goes down, but your revenue also goes down. Your expenditure goes down, the ratio, but your revenue also goes down. So it sort of neutralizes, right? So after the rebasing, we're supposed to, intensify more efforts. And what does the rebasing do? Rebasing is saying that the economy in the measurement of GDP, right? In the measurement of GDP, services is growing more than, say, agriculture, right? We are exporting oil. So oil has become probably more dominant than what? Agriculture, because we've not modernized agriculture and the rest. So we changed the basket. The weight used to be more. You give weights to the sectors. So you change the weight, to services, right? To industry, particularly the industry, petroleum-related industries, to, those sectors are growing. Now, in terms of tax, what it means is that your old tax regime that was focused on cocoa, we removed export duty, that was focused on the old industry, should also now shift. Your VAT, your corporate income tax, GRA should have the wherewithal to tackle the financial sector. It's new. To tackle the communication sector. It's new, right? It didn't used to be, if you ask me, it's just I teach and I upgrade myself. Then when I was collecting taxes or part of the collection mechanism in the 80s and 90s before I left VAT and the rest, we were not thinking about VAT and the services sector because they were not significant to the economy, right? So when you implement a measure as in 2015 to extend the VAT to those sectors which are the new economy, right? And they are pulled back, it means you are not expanding the tax base. Expanding the tax base does not always mean that the traditional guy by the roadside, should be taxed. It also means that your sectors of the economy, which are new, must be covered by what? Your tax, because they now form a larger share of your GDP. Services is the largest, of our GDP. So this is what we mean by stability of the tax base and then going into new areas of the economy. Does expenditure have a solution? We can see from the numbers. We were at 2013, 2022.2 in 2013, mainly on account of single span. The arrears, but once the arrears were cleared, you can see it came down to 20.6, right? And then, it went up slightly 2015. Why? Because crude oil prices fell then, but we had to maintain some expenditures. Now, you remember the 2.3 that we spoke about, which is the offset that we spoke about at the beginning. If you deduct it from 2016, then the 2016 expenditure ratio is not 23.8. It is actually 20, points, 0.5, which is very low. Now, we repeated that 20 in 2017. Then we were supposed to be going down on expenditure, thinking we were doing well, together with the arrears and the rest, only to wake up 2020, this 2020 actual and the 2020 revised budget, that our expenditures have, ballooned, right? Which is the cumulative effect of the offsets and other things. So what it means is that expenditures, even at, okay, let's go to the next, yes. So this is going forward. You can see that if you compare it to where we were at 2020, that is 2025, after the adjustment, to give the picture, the real picture of the economy, including COVID, of course, then assuming we should come down, remember your ratios are very low for revenue. So if we should try to come down to say 20.6 or 21%, right? Then it means that it must show. But you can see that it's towards the end, the 2024, that you've come down to 21% to 22%. As at 2022, next year, we are 24%, right? And we know the absence of the arrears. If you do not have arrears, it means that you won't have expenditures, and that is accounting, for the loan numbers there, right? So, and you can see again, recurrent expenditure taking a lot. If you go by the recurrent expenditure line, which is the third line, you can see was 18, went down to 16, 17, 16. Then in 2020, it shot up to 2022. And we are not expecting to reduce the 2022, towards the end. You come back, here we have the 2020 budget numbers. But if you go to the 2021 budget numbers towards the end, you can see recurrent expenditure is increasing, it's not decreasing. To 22.7, 21.5, then it starts going down, to around 20%. And then, the average is, that's 19, the average is about 21, which means that they have not gone down from the past levels. So, at best, we may be able to keep expenditures at the spending levels. But remember, those spending levels are the ones that are also leading, to the problems that we have. This is a clear picture. This is what we've been talking about. Blue line is compensation. The deep orange line is interest payments. I hope so. Reading from far. Your line that cuts across is your tax revenue line. So it means that only these two items are consumed completely by tax revenue. And then you can see the others coming up, subsidy, the recurrent expenditure, capital, they are all, borrowing. Now the picture does not improve very much. The areas where the two go down is actually the 2020 budget and the 2019, which were low. But immediately you cross that to the revised budget in 2021, the 2020 revised budget, and 2020 budget, and the projection going forward, you see that the picture is virtually the same as where we came from, or just slightly improved, which means that we expect to continue, to depend on loans, which is above, anything above the line, to pay for those expenditures. It's not sustainable. This is what we were trying to move, away from. Okay. So, this is the interest and compensation. You can see interest, because of the borrowing that we are doing to meet almost every expenditure, has risen. There was a big gap. The blue line is wages. It was high in 2013 because of the single spine arrears. Once it was cleared, you can see the steep drop, and then it flattens. But interest, because of the borrowing, keeps going up. Now, the situation was supposed to improve in 2020 budget. You can see the orange line, going forward. But then it spiked with the revised budget. Then it was supposed to go down, in 2023, but, we have already had expressed some of the reservations. This will require significant repayment of our debt to have that picture. We will see it when we come to the debt. So again, in summary, compensation and interest will continue to be a major constraint as we speak. Wages are now being negotiated to be included, if there's any increase, however modest, in, media review for this year, right? We'll see whether we have done much with, interest. Otherwise, the squeezing of capital expenditure in particular will continue. And this means that some of the initiatives, if you have such a picture, some of the initiatives in the budget, right, for private sector, for whatever, we're talking about, infrastructure and others, borrowing is getting to its limit, maybe stall, right? So the big ticket items are a border, free SHS, interest payments, wages, subsidy, and the rest, right? So we need to have a consensus, on this. A well-meaning consumption expenditure, right? You can have a consumption expenditure, it's well-meaning, but if you are going to, borrow to finance them, then it's not sustainable. It's like a household, right? It's like a household. It may be nice to have nice dresses, flashy cars and the rest, but if they all are based on borrowing, your car will be repossessed, right? I mean, borrowing which you are not capable of paying. So what we are talking about is no different from a business or, from a household. And that's why, as a nation, if it is costing us in terms of debt, then we have to, re-examine, right? Because we all now know the cost. That's in terms of debt. From the figures I gleaned from Parliament, about 2.2 billion of the 2020 bond was used to support free SHS. That's how come, in addition to oil revenue, capping, and the rest, right? So that's what it's, So it's not, when you say this, it's not being anti-free SHS. I always say that I'm somebody who went to, to school on a cocoa board scholarship because my parents are cocoa farmers. So I'm not anti-free education at all, no, right? But we're saying that, we must find a middle ground. When the nation contributes to many of us here, I would say almost all of us here, right? When we have children, we should be capable, of, say, paying their fees. I'm not the only person saying this, so that, the focus will be on, on the poor. Yeah, we may have come from poor backgrounds, many of us. Our parents sweated, markets, farms, and whatever, but we must face the reality, when certain expenditure is unsustainable, and go back, to it. Is it a signal that we are at the end? Okay, so we spoke a lot about the arrears already, the exceptional, and all the rest. We can come back with questions, on this, in this area, as we go forward. So this is the behavior, of, our fiscal deficits. And you can see towards the future, we are focusing on the future. We know the past. You can see that the levels of the expenditures, one of them is supposed to come down steeply, that is excluding, that's the one that excludes bailout costs. But once you include the bailout costs, then you can see that the yellow line, flattens and it goes up, right? So, and you see that the levels going forward are just about the same as where we were coming from, right? And that means that the borrowing, may continue. So this is how we have treated arrears. You can see, yes, we had single spine and other things. So in 2013, the blue line is the routine arrears. So you could see that we were having, heavy arrears, then the 2016, that is a 2.3 offset. So all of a sudden it becomes positive, and that's an offset, so we cannot ignore that. But then what happens is that 2017, you see that the arrears provision in the budget keeps shrinking, and sometimes they are zero in the budget. You can see the blue line, right? One, we have an expanding economy. Two, we know we have energy costs. We know we have bank bailout costs. We know all this, and we are being told we are borrowing to pay all of these things. How come are they not reflecting in arrears? One of them is because we are excluding them as, as appendix, footnotes, but then when it comes to financing, we finance them anyway. And so the debt, exposes us. And then despite having ESLA, which was supposed to make some of these payments, you can see from the deep orange line that it's not every year that we have made provision for ESLA. It's sporadic. Right? In fact, in 2017, there was no provision for ESLA. Then we made it 2018, 2019. Then in 2020, it was zero. In fact, if you go to the 2020 budget, you can check for yourself. The bailout cost was zero. It was when we did a revised budget, that we included, ESLA. And that's one of the reasons we say, shut up, the deficit. ESLA is not COVID, is it? We know the cost. Bank bailout, energy. So if it contributed to arrears in a revised budget, why blame what? COVID, right? It requires some candidness, for everything. So again, we've gone through this. We can come back. The important thing is the pipeline contract, which is a 7 billion. Interestingly, there is that compilation which went to the Auditor General, I believe was in Appendix 5 or the budget, was in, Appendix 5, a form in the budget guidelines that were issued in 2016. Interestingly, after taking it out for a long time, 2020, we have an Appendix 7. So this is what I mean by I don't have all the numbers, right? What is it that is telling us? We hear it may be as high as 25, 30 billion were disclosures made to Parliament. This is why you cannot, determine, because the arrears provision that we have is nowhere near 10 billion or even what we know. Contractors say they are owed, we know the energy, cost, we know the, let's show the expenditure even if we are going to show, the revenue, the extra revenue, right? So this is the extent to which I say that let's not go away with this presentation as though we are proposing every solution. There are things that, we do not know. We do not know the true state of pipeline in terms of arrears. Okay. So, again, this is a picture, that we have. You can see that after a stability from 2013, you can see the number seems to be, quite manageable all the way to 2017. Then in 2018, because the brown line is, is a bailout cost, because it comes in, then the yellow line drops. Then it comes in again, then the yellow line drops. It goes out, then it seems to be stable. Then the revised budget, because we include a very high amount of bailout costs, if you add it, then you see the blue line and the yellow line, all of them coming and becoming very wide. This is just on account of bailout. We are not talking about IMF, RCF, or anything in connection with government, COVID, right? This is bailout costs. You can check for yourself, in the budget. And then you can see, that they virtually disappear, as we go. This is the financing, right? So this financing, you would also have to make adjustments for it. Because this financing is showing the narrow, right? It's showing the narrow. So it's nowhere near, the broad, which includes the bailout costs, and some routine arrears and the rest, which are left out. But we produce it for us to see. And we make a point. You can see the light green. That you see that is the program, loans relating to COVID. We got money from IMF, we got money from World Bank, African Development Bank, development partners, we did not bring them. We got money from the stabilization fund, which is further down, right? And all of this covers COVID. The COVID costs are covered, apart from maybe this year's, the vaccine, and others. The 1 billion may not be enough, after the last year's, spending, right? So, but as far as the past is concerned, we borrowed, to meet those covered costs, So this is just a picture of, how, the thing is, the lack of consistency, not just for the current administration, but you can see even in the past. We need to bring some stability and consistency, right? You see that, we use lines deliberately sometimes to show, and even the bars, you can see that they keep going what? Up and down. We need fiscal stability, right? And that is what the PRMA was supposed to resolve. If frequently we have bushfires, if frequently we have drought, which lowers, Bui and Akosombo, and therefore puts pressure on thermal and whatever, instead of the past where we accumulate subsidies, we should have accumulated a stabilization fund when times were good, so that when times are bad, then we fall into it, we fall on it, right? If we had to borrow during bad times, we could have been paying down our debt through the sinking fund, so that when the times are rough, then we know that our debt levels are manageable, right? As we speak, the U.S. is proposing to raise taxes to cover COVID, right? But they are going to take it off. They have a sunset clause, just as we had a sunset clause for extra 3 to 5 years, right? So the temporary taxes. We've had temporary taxes that we fall on anytime there's crisis. It started from the Rawlings, era. We either call it national stabilization or fiscal stabilization. We've alternated between these two terms. And there are two: tax on financial and other service sectors. The tax that was put on the financial service sector is topping up the tax that was put back in 2015 when we had a crisis. It was not removed. But if you go to the Dr. Bochwe Pepra era, they took it off after they introduced it. You come to the Osafo Mafo, late Banri Edu era, they had temporary taxes when you have crisis, because an economy will always have crisis. But within 2 to 3 years, they take it off, right? The Dr. Dufo administration had it. We had it. Because of the 2015-2016 drop in crude oil prices, we are going to take it off in 2017 with Sankofa and 10. It was never taken off, and we're adding it. So how do you depend on the same thing if you make it permanent? How do you depend on it, when you have the next crisis? Because the economy will always go through crisis. I'm not being fatalistic, but that is the reality of fiscal management, right? Because it may have nothing to do with you. If demand falls in advanced countries and they stop eating chocolate or whatever, it means your cocoa prices, will go down. You have less foreign exchange, you have less budget revenues, right? Your farmers begin to. So you must build the buffers when the prices are good, right? And the U.S. learned that lesson. The U.S., the richest economy, they learned that lesson, and they built, I believe, $3 trillion, US dollars or so, the Treasury, which was the first funds they fell on when COVID came. They learned a lesson from the global financial crisis, right? And we have it in the PRMA. Whether we're talking about, stability of the budget, which is a stabilization fund, whether we're talking about writing down debt, contingency. The first time we went into the stabilization fund, the contingency fund, which we were building, to draw from it was when the Kwame Nkrumah, not far from here, Kwame Nkrumah cycle fire, and flooding occurred in 2015. We have not put a penny again. We have not put a penny in the contingency fund since then, right? But we are going to have contingencies. We always have flooding in the north. When the water, overflows, we always know it, right? And that's the funds which, national mobilization program should be relying on, right? It's not just for big crises, it can be for small crises, but for those villages and the rest, it is big crisis, right? So I think with the budget buffers and the rest, and this is why some of us are passionate, when it comes to the structure of the petroleum revenue, management act, let us be faithful to it. I think there's a need for us to have a debate, on the way we are using, on the 10th anniversary of exporting crude oil, on the way we are, we went through 1.5 years. I was involved, together with technical advisors like Dr. Makotufo, who led the CSO. I mean, some of you CSOs will remember the name very well, and the rest, right? He was the chief technical, I was the political, as a deputy, moved many of the, PRMA was one of the longest, took the longest time to pass as an act in Parliament because of the soul searching. We all said never again, right? So I think we should go back and have a debate. Have we been faithful? Otherwise, one day, we'll be accused like the other African countries of using our revenue for consumption. And when it comes to that, nobody will be praising us, right, as a nation. So we move to public debt, and we know the numbers. So public debt is projects very far. It's only the fund that does, some projection. But this is what we are talking about. So you see that there was a slight drop, then going into 2014, 2015, even though it was rising, you see that it was flat. In fact, there is a version of this that goes back to the HIPIC era. And you see that the only period when it started, this was, during the period. And then you can see the green line and the blue line were the same. There was no difference, right? From 2017, 2018, there was a difference. And what's the difference? The blue excludes bailout costs. Right, that's the only difference. Right. Now you can see that the potency of using sinking fund and the rest, yes, I keep repeating it because those are the instruments we have to, was that immediately we put, we started applying the sinking fund, and then also we refinance much of our bullet bonds. Bullet bonds means that you are paying on the interest, you are deferring the principal, which is what we seem to be doing now, right? We're having difficulty borrowing to roll them over. And it's not just sovereign bond. It's not just external. In fact, we do that for treasury bills. The reason why you can tell your bankers, oh, roll over my, treasury bill remitted of sterling and add the interest so that it can even be multiplied, is that you are actually rolling over because the government is rolling over. Right? The government is not paying down. But immediately we started paying those things down, you see that the green line started dropping. You see that the blue line with or with, they all started dropping. That's the domestic, foreign, and total. They all started dropping. And then we stopped those measures, and you can see that the rate at which we are borrowing started going up, which is reflected in the total line on the left. You see, it became flat, then it started going up. Right? So if there is any evidence that some of the measures have worked, this is it. And in fact, later on, we can show you the one in the debt management report. It shows virtually the same thing. The 2020 debt management report that was just, released. Right. So let me just end on why we say, that the issue was not just COVID. We'll be very fast on this. You can see that our growth, this is the situation we discussed with the IMF. It's in the IMF report. The good thing about the fund is that they always publish their reports. It's now part of what, their shareholders, including Ghana, agreed. So you can download this. The Article 4 in 2019, and then the loan report. We said we had gross borrowing needs of 16.1. We revised it to 20.2 to include, COVID. If you look to the right, you will see that the first column below, there are no figures. That's because there was no COVID when they did Article 4. To the right, you will see that all of a sudden, that's what caters for COVID, in the second column, which is the COVID. But let's go to the left. So you see 16.1 and then 22.2. These are our borrowing needs that we disclose to the fund. And then we said they will be met from external borrowing, domestic, and then amortization, external. We gave the various things. We'll go to the domestic market to borrow. We have a non-marketable, which is a euphemism for Bank of Ghana providing money to government. So you can see the money that Bank of Ghana gave is there. So these were, all there. The cash buffers. We even said we use ESLA. And then we said that there's the IPP funds and the rest, all those things, were there. right? Now, we come to financing before exceptional, that is COVID. Now you see the 16.1, but when it came to COVID, you see that the 22.2 changed to 18.1. It should have been 22.2, right? Because if it's 22.2, then it means that your gap, the sources of revenue, you have to search for more. And the difference is equal to interest rates. If you look at the detailed, table, right? So you see exceptional financing that we disclose to the fund, the green line further down, exceptional financing is 2.1. And we said the IMF will give us money, the World Bank will give us money. After that, we still had a remaining gap of 2.9. Now, if you correct the 18 to 22 and you add it to the 2.9, you see that you are at 6 or 7%. Are you following me? Go to the top. You see, whatever is at the top on the left should be the same on the right. Remember we were bringing down the deficit down to fiscal balance 1, then we bring it down to fiscal balance 2. It's the same amount. It should be the same amount until you add something, right? So it should be the same. This may be an arithmetic error. It may be whatever, but we say it should be 22. So if it's 22 point something, let's say it's 22.1. It means that you are adding what? 4%, right? So if you had used 22%, then your fiscal gap, after, all of this thing, which is 2% or so, should go up to about 6 or 7%. And you see why we say that there was a gap of about 7%, right? Before, COVID, because the COVID cost has been catered for, even in this table. So this is it. So if you correct the 22, then as you come down, the remaining gap, it should be adjusted. Sorry, there's a mistake there, right? So there should be a second table. Okay, I think there's a second table, which if you add, suddenly increases it, to, okay, no, it's not been added. There should be a table. It's still 18.1, which should be adjusted to, should be 22.2, and then it would increase the financing. So this is the first reason we say that we have other problems, Now, if you come to the 2020 revised budget, okay, so this is it. So when you correct to 22.2, now we add, because they are percentage of GDP, you just have to look at the nominal GDP that was used. And you can have, the cities there. So you can see financing gap, financing of gap 6.3, and then it changes to 7.4. So you see the 7.4 repeats itself after the IMF financing and the rest. So we have the gap of about 7%, right? And then we said we'll use the stabilization fund, to, in there somewhere you see even gold monetization, which is some, name probably, an earlier name for Japan or something. Gold monetization was envisaged as part of the solution. If you look at the detailed table, right? So, so our own, and then we come to our own mid-year review. And a mid-year review, the adjustments that were made, this is it. We reduced, because of COVID, we reduced, revenues, significantly and the rest, right? And then we said, in spite of that, we had to finance the expenditure. And the expenditure increased from 21.2 to 25%, whilst, the deficit, whilst the revenues were going down. So this is what gave us the huge, gap, right? Now, if you look at the adjustments that were made, the first one was for compensation, wages. The second one was for interest. That's the positive ones, right? And then you have the COVID-related. So you see, even the budget is showing, in addition to COVID, that we had, some gaps, which, are not all, identified. So this is the overall balance after all these adjustments you have to. So this is another evidence that we had some problems and we should look at them, right? Later on, we'll give these tables out, and during question time, we can go through them, those of you who have, questions, especially the financial journalists who are here. Okay. So in conclusion, what we're saying, is that we need a whole budget approach. But it need not be new. This was already envisaged when we had one oil field. And we should be doing more with 2 oil fields. We're able to lower, the lower debt. We're able to bring the financing of instability in the budget through the stabilization fund, and the rest. So that should be a beginning, right? And this is something which has been done, and the evidence is there already. We can't be pushing everything into consumption. We need a revenue modernization, very comprehensive one. There were a number of tax reforms that were embarked upon. Remember 2009, we settled the question by creating GRA to replace the RAGB. Then we merged IRS and VAT service into the domestic tax division. If you remember, the administration was also brought together. By 2016, we had reviewed every single tax law because the Income Tax Act was 2000. And we are in an oil and services sector economy. So you needed, to bring them, the VAT, the income tax, those 2 in particular. So they were all revamped. The VAT was 2013. The income tax, I believe, was around the same time. We did a Revenue Administration Act because we're merging, to make tax administration, uniform. Then we created a large, medium, and small taxpayer offices. I heard some commentary yesterday from GR, and I've known this about some changes that have been made to what is taxpayer service centers. Taxpayer services is a function of tax administration, right? And it's a function that will be carried on whether you have a large taxpayer office, small taxpayer office, or medium taxpayer office, right? Segmentation is a practice to attend to the needs of small, medium, and large taxpayers, right? So I think some of the confusion in doing, in moving away like VAT and the rest from what is globally accepted is something that we have to examine. Otherwise you have instability, in what, we are doing. Then we have to come to expenditures again. We started a gift list and all those. We have, some countries do unfunded mandates. Unfunded mandates means that, you remember the war in the US, right? When it came to building the wall, the question was, where's the revenue going to come from? And as you got, they had a law which says that if you have a new proposal, during the campaign, you must show where the money will come from. In the end, they had to fall on the military and others, and it was difficult. So those are some of the ways in which we can. Then we have to restore the budget buffers. We have said this is like a summary. We have to stop our dependence, on debt by being realistic with, arrears, and make sure that they are all covered, in the budget. They should all be covered as we have done in the past. It's nothing new. And this is where, again, I call on my own institute to give us. Somebody said, yes, we had adopted IFSAS. Yes, the government adopted IFSAS in 2015, to be precise. We adopted IFSAS in 2015. But in Ghana, not even the government can adopt a standard without the Institute of Chartered Accountants issuing, a national standard. And even if the national standard is repeating the international standard, so we have an IFRS version and the rest, and that is what is left. And once that is done, the treatment of arrears will be settled, as we have in the government finance statistics of the IMF. So I think if we want, to make progress, then we should, So then we should have our own, homegrown. The budget is not a substitute. We've seen, that. If we are not going to go to a fund, let us do our own homegrown, however name we'll call it, to make the path a bit more, credible. Thank you very much. I can see the hands were out there. I hope it has not been too technical. I'm always told that from you. Yes, over to you.
Okay, I think we can give him another round of applause, please. All right, so at this point, we'll start taking some questions. But before we get into the questions, some of you may be wondering, what does PFM Africa mean? So I'll just give you a little brief about this organization, PFM Tax Africa. So it's a financial management and tax consultancy. So there's a team of financial and tax experts, and their mission is to enhance the capacity of all public and private sector clients so that they utilize their resources effectively. So there's the consultancy bit, but apart from the consultancy work, PFM Tax Africa also provides capacity building, and this is an example of it. There is also the academy, and that is work that is driven by the consultancy as well. So we have the PFM Academy, and it collaborates with other institutions to offer training to individuals and institutions in issues relating to taxation, revenue, treasury, civil service, and other public agencies. So if you're also interested, the Academy can provide you that training. It also works with universities and other academies, think tanks, and the like to discuss all issues relating to public financial management as well as tax. So that's the work Mr. Seth Tekpe has also been doing in addition to all his writing and consulting. Just to let you know that this, and teaching, okay. And this program is in partnership with the Natural Resource Governance Institute. So we want to thank them. We have some of their representatives here. Dennis Jair, who is the Africa Program Officer. Dennis, can you raise your hand? All right, thank you, Dennis. And also Emmanuel Mina, who is the Finance Officer. Emmanuel, are you around? Okay, he's around. He's at the top corner there. All right, thank you. They are both coming from the NRGI. So it's time for questions. If any of you want to set the ball rolling, I can take your questions now. Any hands? Any takers? All right, so I'll set the ball rolling then, Mr. Tekpe. So I think the most important slide in what you presented is the slide 4041, which talked about, what the look ahead should be. It's clear that our debt and deficit levels put us in among the list of countries with high risk and unsustainable levels for management. The last figure I saw is that our national debt in relation to GDP is some 74.65%. So based on this figure and looking at the slides you showed us where expenditures still seem to be going higher, which areas can we tackle to reduce expenditure while also making efforts to reduce the deficit?
Yeah, thank you very much. It seems an easy answer, but the truth is when you're at this point, you look at every expenditure line. There are some you cannot do anything about. Okay, I'll qualify that later on. So the qualification is that if you do not go into a program to restructure your debt, to maybe lengthen it, to reduce the stress and whatever, you have to pay interest, you have to, even if you have to borrow, because the consequence of not doing so is to default. And if you default as a nation, it's very disastrous. It's not, so nations don't like to default. You have to get to a point. So those, you can hardly do anything about. Everything else is gain. But there are some, like public sector workers, government is an employer, and you have a responsibility to them. Should they bear, the whole cost? Or do you do what you call structural, which is what we attempted to do? Structural means that You don't see the public, sector payroll. It's not politically correct to say some of this is as the only source of generating revenue for young people. If you do infrastructure, if you take 50 schools that you complete, you can imagine the number of, from all levels, from laborers to clerks, to architects to, that you create jobs. And this would normally include, professionals, all the way, down, up. You also end up, the main contractor ends up giving subcontract. This weekend I was talking to a contractor and he told me, yes, I employ, he was giving me a perspective on numbers. I employ about 300, employees directly. But what you are saying is true because I know that 2 of my subcontractors employ about 200 of their own. So that person alone is employing, this is a major contractor, I wouldn't want to be mentioning names, generates about 500. And that's what we mean by private sector, government enabling the private sector, through the budget. It's not just always giving just, money, but a pattern of expenditure can also enable. So you can imagine the hospitals and the rest. So when you start shifting the focus, that's the deep structural one. Apart from the cuts you make immediately, you have to do some deep structural change to the way you do things. And that also helps. But that begins to yield fruits 2 to 3 years. You can't be doing those almost immediately because you don't even have the money to award contracts. So every line, will have to be examined, and then and then GRA, of course, always, is the one who has to. And that is where we as citizens also have to meet our commitment. It's difficult in the COVID era to say that you should be paying more taxes and the rest, pay your arrears, but the nation is where it is. Yeah.
In reference to the GRA, you said that the ECOWAS or sub-regional level is 20% of GDP. That's what they're supposed to mobilize.
It's global for middle-income countries.
Okay.
Because you are losing grants and concessional finance, you know what I mean. So you have to generate. Being middle-income means that you are supposed to grow up to mature. It's like, a child when they may earn very low income, right, to begin with, but you make them, manage it and whatever. Once in a while you can do something until they are able to look, after you. Right.
In recent times, the GRA says they are planning to mobilize some 60 billion cedis, and that comes to some 15% of GDP. But knowing that we're in COVID times, you said that they need to look at other ways, targeting other sectors. What are these other areas that you think they could mobilize more funding from in an era of COVID?
Let's put this in context. The world is recovering from COVID. And short of, things forcing governments across to shut down again, like what is happening in India now. There are no lockdowns. The airports are open. Cargo is moving. Passengers are moving. It requires some care. So we are not in the same COVID situation, and that's what we mean by recovery. The world itself is recovering. You could see sometimes gold prices have been high, but you see even cocoa price, oil prices going up, then coming down. That's what happens, in the recovery. So we should be in the recovery mode. And I was talking about we as citizens, who have to pay our taxes. If COVID makes it very difficult for you, the Commissioner General has the facility to, instead of paying now, he can give you 3 months to pay. It's in the interest of the government to spread the payment, than to what? Confiscate your property, what's it going to do with it, right? So those are powers which the Commissioner, not even the Minister, the Commissioner General, has to make, things easy. But they will have to collect, old debt, the debt that was deferred, those who have not filed, they will have to take those administrative measures. The other element which I hinted at, I didn't go in, is the economy is changing, and the services sector is growing, right? So GRA should make sure they understand the services sector, and train their staff to be able to do better audits. Because if you don't understand the transaction, you cannot. They've been doing this because, of course, they've lived with the services sector for a very long time. But you have oil services, and it's not just the explicit one like financial services and the rest. You have the oil services coming up, greatly involving. Sometimes when it involves foreigners, it's very difficult because of what you call transfer pricing and all those things. Transfer pricing means that, the cost that, they incur outside, because they are a global company, they come and load it to your domestic cost, and then they pay less profit, right? And then they go and pay the right amount in their countries, which sometimes can give them a credit for bringing the money from outside, right? So they make more money outside. So we need training in audits, and the rest, right? The training may be in mining and the rest, that's old economy, right? We must begin to train in the new economy. Oil, it's not just services, but oil services, and, recently there was news about massive evasion by oil companies and the rest. And it's not just the foreigners, even domestic, those who are importing and exporting. What exchange rate are they using, right? Because a 0 point something percentage change in exchange rate, if I'm supposed to use 5, let me be realistic, 5.5, and I use 5.7, immediately it increases my cost of importation by 0.2%. So these are all the things. So verification, database by GRA. Luckily, GRA has been in this game for a very long time, but it's enabling them, with more resources to be able to do this. So it takes both administration and then policy. And on the policy front, I think, as I said it already, look, there's a global standard. We have a good tax structure, corporate income tax, VAT, VAT. VAT is based on a credit. If you take it, some cost from this, some levies, like we have done straight levies, and you deny the businesses, input tax credit. Let me tell you one consequence. Recently, the AFCTA, you remember we saw that Ghana is very low on the standards. We are not competitive. We are not going to be competitive. Why? Because, the exporter who is exporting, you give them a refund for the local cost, because otherwise you are exporting your cost. And that's what every country does. So if you block that input tax credit, right, you may go through administrative means, frustrations and whatever. If it's not, what would what else would the local producer do? They will add it to cost, and they will transfer, and then they won't be competitive. Even in West Africa, let alone in Europe and the rest. So when we disturb the tax structure and whatever, we end up also making things difficult, for our local industries and less competitive. So it's not just administration, it's not just GRA, it's the policy.
Okay.
Also.
I don't know, does anyone have any questions now before we start reading the others? All right.
Now the hands are up, yes.
Okay, so now that's...
Yes, as a developing country, I believe that we need to spend a lot of money, except that sometimes because of seepages and corruption, some of the monies are not going to the right places. But I'm more interested in revenue. We haven't done much about property taxes, and so many properties coming up. I live in a small flat in Leighton in London, and 1,200 a year I was paying, and if you don't pay, you know what will happen to you. So in Ghana, we haven't seen much on property taxing. Secondly, fines and penalties. People misbehave on the road, they drive on the shoulders, they park anywhere, they throw rubbish, and we can have on-the-spot fines, and we can just issue tickets to people. These are all bringing discipline and at the same time raising funds for the state. We haven't seen much of that, especially for property taxes. We can raise a lot of money from property taxes. Thank you.
All right, I'll take a second question. Please, can you pass the mic next to him?
Okay, thank you. My name is Maxwell.
Can you speak up? Sorry.
Yeah, my name is Maxwell. Honorable, 2 questions. With regards to revenues, we heard a lot about the exemptions bill around 2009 when we were exiting, and as you are aware, it was one of the exit clauses or one of the targets we needed to meet under the program, and we prepared to pass it at the time we were exiting. Nothing has been said about it, and we are at a time where we need every penny. Whatever we can gather from anywhere, we need it. And exemptions we've all agreed that exemptions is one of the loopholes that the country is entangled with. what is your suggestion on it? What is your take on why it is dragging? And two, what do you suggest should be done to get it passed and implemented? Then the second one is on the GDP growth for 2020 and its implications for 2021. Our target was to do 0.9%, but we ended up doing 0.4%. Now, what is the implication of that on revenue projections for 2021? And again, what is the implications of that on the fiscal consolidation process that is underway for 2021? Thank you.
Will you take another one to answer this?
So, Etanam, take your question, and then we'll take those sets of questions that Mr. Tekwe will answer, and then we'll come back.
And then
Okay, so
answers would after this round.
Okay, so I'd want to ask something on the PRMA. I didn't hear you talk about allocations. I'm thinking that given our debt situation, should the PRMA now insist on high allocation of petroleum revenue to the sinking fund for debt service? I also wanted to ask about should Ghana start implementing or imposing a debt or borrowing ceiling to limit the growth in debt burden? And then finally, just touching on what Maxwell said, is there much hope in the anticipated review of tax exemptions to save government some revenue, or there are a lot of constraints there as well?
Possibly we'll have to do two. Looking at your exposition on taxes, are you then saying that there should be an overhaul of the policy and total reform of the tax regime? We've been speaking with businesses, and they have indicated they have issues with the VAT, and possibly if you may want to deliberate on that a bit more as to whether you would want to suggest it is overhauled completely. And then secondly, do I get the impression that we could be going for another program if we don't do our things well?
When you say another program, what do you mean?
An IMF program, possibly. One of the slides seem to suggest so. Have we gotten there? And what do we need to do to get into another program?
What do we need to do to get into another program,
Yes.
or not
Out.
to get caught up in another one? Because it seems as if you want us to go into another program.
Not at all.
But you mentioned something about some businesses saying that they have issues with the VAT. Is it the new increases, or with VAT as
New
a
increases and what they've always faced in the past. AGI, GUTA have issues with the payment of VAT,
Okay.
as Mr. Tekwe
All right.
indicated.
Thank you for the clarity. Okay, Mr. Tekwe.
Okay, so thanks very much. Exemptions. There's a reality about exemptions. And by the way, we exemptions have been on the card for a very long time. And we have had alternative practices in the past. When I was starting my career, there was something introduced called the Treasury Credit Notes to attempt to control exemptions, and I'll come back to it. The reality about exemptions is that the bulk of exemptions are government contracts, particularly foreign ones. And it derives from the fact that when a country gives you a loan, or even when the World Bank gives you a loan, the loan does not pay domestic taxes. So domestic taxes are not factored in the amount of the loan, right? So if a foreign contractor is bringing in goods for the project, or even if it's a domestic contractor bringing in goods, there's no reason why we should treat them separately. Bringing in machinery, bringing in materials, and whatever, not consumption, right? Which has even a lower rate. You know, inputs has a lower import duty rate, and then you have your VAT, you have your, other charges and the rest. The tax has to be paid. If the contractor is forced to pay the tax, they will load it, and they will go to government for a local amount to pay the tax, because the contract is for government, right? So this is where the dilemma is. Now, the mechanism that was tried, and it's subject to a lot of abuse, no question about it, right? But when you look at the quantum of the arrears, this is the dilemma. If the Ministry for Roads takes a loan, if government takes a loan on behalf of the Ministry for Roads and is constructing the roads, and the contractor brings in, items, or the port, Terminal 3 or anything, things we don't produce here, then the Ministry for Roads may have to make a provision for the duty that has to be paid, the tax that has to be paid, because the loan, which is paying for the cost, which is being given to them for the cost, does not include the tax. Now, how does the Ministry for Roads does that? They have to add the amount to their budget. Right. They have to add the amount to their budget, which means that when the goods arrive, then the Ministry for Roads, right, would come to Ministry of Finance for the money and use the money to pay, guess who, GRA. It crosses out. So if I give you 15, right, and which is your allocation, and then you give them money as cost, expenditure. We saw revenue and expenditure. So expenditure increases by 15, right? And then you pay GRA 15. The 15 crosses out. Revenue 15, GRA, cost 15. It doesn't increase. So that type of exemption, will not increase revenue, right?
But that seems complicated, sir. Why don't we then make provision so that the loan also then factors that in? Because then it is dependent on officials at the various ministries to ensure that the cross-out is done.
Well, you see, the point is, remember, you are taking loan from a country, a multilateral institution which has members, for example, including Ghana, right? And they are saying that our loan will not pay local taxes. If you want to pay the local taxes, then raise the money yourself. And it would also mean that if we include it, our debt will also go up. And then we have to raise, revenues to pay that debt, right? Because the debt is being increased by the taxes, right? So the best is global. And this is the dilemma, yes, we may have difficulty, and if we say that we have to, but to increase the debt will also mean that, the loan will also mean that you increase, whatever. Now let me just finish it. So having said that, that is just one element. But there are other elements which clearly, can be checked. For example, perpetual exemptions. Perpetual exemptions, and then some of them like, let me say perpetual exemption. An exemption, what we give to infant industry, infant sectors. So let's say when the services sector was growing up, when the financial services were coming up, and then competition, and we want competition, we say we'll give you tax holidays. We say, we'll exempt you from VAT, we'll exempt you from those type of things. Do they ever mature? Right? That's a question. We may do it on, and then there are certain areas where government did not used to, charge interest for the same reason, taxes on its bonds. The profit made, if I buy a treasury bill and I sell it at a profit, right? If you have to pay the taxes, government has paid, so government normally would waive that tax. But should we waive it for, the stock exchange has been, it's celebrated, I was at 20th or 30th years? 30 years, yes. So and the economy is growing, many people are earning, income now by buying stocks, including government stocks and the rest, the private sector. Should we continue to exempt what we call capital gains after 30 years? These are the hard questions. When it comes to those ones, I think it requires some, otherwise the tax regime is falling on employees and the same people, right? And the new economy is not being covered. It may not be popular. It may be difficult, and you may have strong business lobbies and the rest. But if you are going to continue exempting them, you would always, not, we increase the VAT, for example, on non-core financial services. When you take your money to the bank, right, you are taking it for savings, and they are giving it as a loan. When they pay you interest, you are not spending. VAT is spending on is spending on a spending expenditure. When you take your money to your bank, you are saving. So there should be no VAT on the interest that you earn. We should encourage more people to save so that the banks can give out loans and the rest. But what about ATMs that didn't used to exist, right? If I decide to pay cash, right, and you decide to use the services of a bank, and you have a card and you go and the bank charges you interest, which is income to the bank, why shouldn't we tax that, right? So this was the logic behind extending the VAT to the non-core financial services. If I buy a shoe, if I buy my shirt, if I buy my car, everything, I pay expenditure. It's the expenditure pattern that is changing in the economy, right? So we have become elite, and you are paying for services, just like you pay for other services. And somebody is paying VAT on those services, right? So we extended the VAT to the non-core financial services, not interest, right? It was removed with fanfare. How do you expand the tax base, right? So these are some of, the ways in which we are saying that. So we should distinguish between the two and make bold, to say these ones we cannot, even if it will mean giving a period of 2 to 3 years, in the law for people to, wind up their affairs and make sure that you are told in 3 years, in 2 years, it will come. You have to start paying taxes where you used to have, waivers. We should move in that direction. And that was part of the reform of 2013, 2013 to 2016.
I think he wanted to know what's the status of the bill, though. Do we know?
I know it's in Parliament, and the reasons I'm giving is part of the discussion and whatever about what should go in and what should not and all that, right? But I think that the issues are known, and some of them may be political, some of them may be reality, some of them may have to do with, do we bring the treasury credit notes back? The credit, what I described, when GRA collects the tax, it's revenue, so it's a credit to government. But when Ministry of Roads uses it to go and pay the duty, it's a debit. It crosses out. But the advantage of having that mechanism is that GRA is able to monitor, right? And the controller is also able to check the abuses through the auditors and the rest, Ministry of Finance, the abuse that comes. Because if the Ministry of Roads has to use its allocation to pay taxes, it will make sure that, if you are required to bring a pickup, you don't bring a Mercedes-Benz, and say that, it's a pickup.
All right, Mr. Tekwe, I'll have to rein you in a bit. He asked a second question.
Yes.
What's the implication on revenue projection and the physical projections for
the GDP.
GDP growth? Yes.
Yeah, it has to be revised. And I think we may see it in a media review, unless we believe strongly that there will be a strong recovery in 2021. Because 2020 is feeding into 2021. So if we don't believe that, there will be a strong recovery and it goes down, then, the good thing that we didn't go into recession. We went into two quarters of recession. We didn't carry it into another quarter, which would have made the whole of 2016 go into recession for the first time. Of course, the quarterly was first time in about 37 years, but we escaped it. We escaped it also when we did a 2.8, old basis 3.6 back in 2015. Right, so we should build on it so that going to recession is not anybody's interest. So it's both domestic and yes.
Etonam's question about the PRMA, the allocation, should the PRMA then now insist on these allocations being made to the sinking fund?
It is a law. It's already a law, and a law has not been changed in many respects, right? It's just that some areas and this where civil society, PIAC and others are coming in, so probably strengthen the law with respect to, we always have needs for consumption. And like a household, if you keep spending all your money, you never save. And you will never build capital, you never build a house, you never buy a car, you never buy furniture. It takes sacrifice. So it applies to a nation. So if we are going to borrow, we must learn to pay down. It's as simple as that. Yes.
Isaac's question, he asked about, should there be an overhaul of the tax policy? I know you answered that a bit in the beginning, but then the other issue is looking at where we are economically. How high a chance is it that we may end up in an IMF program, say in a year or two, if the economy doesn't recover?
Well, the goal, you remember the Asian tigers, right? Let me give specific examples. They used to go to the IMF. They put their house together as middle income, now emerging. Some of them have become advanced countries. And they improved their revenue collection and other mechanisms.
So going to the IMF is not necessarily a bad thing?
No, because it's not. Not necessarily.
Not
And
necessarily.
let me give you a second example quickly.
The reason why I'm just raising it is there's a negative perception about it, and people prefer that we are not under an IMF program. Our Ghanaians prefer that the country is not.
Well, then we should put our house in order. But remember, let me go to the global financial crisis. You remember the peaks? Portugal, Ireland, Greece, Spain. These were advanced countries. They never dreamt of going back to the IMF. The last time many of those countries went to the IMF was during the Second World War. So many of them, which gave rise to the IMF and the World Bank and all those. But what did they do? Within a year and a half to 2 years, they had paid their loan. They had put their housing in order, and they exited. Right? So for developing countries, the difficulty is that when you are in a situation like, for example, let me give a specific example. The IMF is sponsoring under COVID a debt suspension program. Right? Is it better? The question we should ask ourselves is it better than the zero coupon that we did? Right? Because the zero coupon, one, we are borrowing 500, we get only 400. We discounted the money. So we are not getting the whole of the 500. Right? That's one. We are going to pay in a bullet, one time, the whole of the 500 plus in 2025 by a new government, maybe. Right? So what do you put in place? If we had gone to the fund, maybe under the debt suspension, yes, there would have been things that say, okay, you are coming for this money. What are you going to do right? That's always a question. And those are the things that become the conditionalities, right? So if you don't manage well, and so if we are pushed, that may be the last resort, because the only lenders to developing countries that are in trouble, who do not have their own buffers, their own sinking funds and the rest, is the IMF and the World Bank, supported by the African Development Bank. And that's how come you end up there. So it's a matter of you managing, your house well. So if institutions and others, unions don't want us to go to the IMF, then we should work as a nation, in making sure that we have policies. And that's again where we go back to sinking fund and the rest. We saw it, the evidence is there. When we started putting those things in place, the debt rate of borrowing was going down. Our years, there's another graph. If we have to put it down, you see the interest rate, the treasury bill rate started going down also. So maybe we can put it up.
Okay, we'll come back to the
there was a question on
coupon.
property.
Pardon?
Property tax.
Yes, somebody asked about property tax.
Property tax in the British tradition is a local government tax. So it's an MMDA tax, if we like, right? But the question is, the municipal and the metropolitan element, right? They earn enough, they're in the cities and whatever, and they should have the capacity to manage property tax. Central government can help them. For example, GRA can twin, because the same properties, many of the commercial properties have rent, or they have, other incomes like, lodging in this hotel, and, so you can, through those records and whatever, that was started.
The GRA, in a recent discussion with them, indicates that they are going to step up the collection of the rent tax. But in terms of property rates, they will not be able to step in directly to do that work.
No, because the law is a prerogative of the MMDAs. But there's nothing that prevents us from amending the law and allowing, in some countries it's done, and allowing to provide some,
because the local authorities
to make their
have
data,
not demonstrated the ability to mobilize these funds.
Well, they have in the past, until we have remembered the GET fund, which was started bringing in revenue. And I say that they have because I used to be an assembly member even before the assembly for a very long time. And so I understand some of the structure that is. One other big issue is based on what you call the cadastral, the value, of the property, which has to be, upgraded periodically. That has broken down. But now it can be done electronically and the rest. And I know I mean, during my era, a lot of work was done on it, and I know a lot of work is being done on it. Maybe we should just get done with, and then amend the law, to allow GRA. It's a matter of also disclosure of, if we do not amend the GRA law, the taxpayer is protected, from GRA passing on the information, to even another government agency, because otherwise people will become reluctant and things like that. So but I believe that even the property owners, the real estate and the rest, they would be interested. For example, in many countries, the benefit of property tax is what we call the municipal bond. You remember we had an initiative that is using the property tax to support the issuing of bonds for the municipal assembly, the municipalities, so that they can use it to do infrastructure. In many countries, the roads here within reach it's not central government, right? It's the AMA's responsibility, but they need the wherewithal to be able to do that. And so we need these structures, and these are some of the developments which, made it. So there's some initiatives have been done, already in the past, continue. I think we just have to, get it done.
All right, we have some questions online. We don't have too much time, so another 15 minutes and we'll need to wrap up. So this one says, Honorable Tekpe, demand for VAT in Ghana is low. How can the success of mobile phone coverage in Ghana be used as a catalyst to demand for VAT? So that's one question. Another one here says, Ghana, like other African countries, finds itself in a conundrum faced with limited revenue capacity and potential debt distress. Yet we have to borrow to meet the demands for containment and recovery from COVID-19 to minimize scarring. How can we do this effectively without compromising fiscal consolidation and further debt deterioration down the road? This one says, do you subscribe to the view that in terms of minimizing the inefficiencies with the resources we borrow and lack of continuity of projects from various regimes, there should be reporting on debt mapping to projects to guide us as a basis for advocacy for fiscal consolidation? So, and then...
The last, sorry.
Yes, and there's one more, last one. It says, what can be done to bring our contingency fund back to life? We are unable to borrow again. What can be done?
Okay, so the contingency fund. Okay, let me put this in context. Countries make transition when they have opportunities. Countries make transitions when they have opportunities. So, by providence, we got oil. And with Jubilee, we said, never again. Let's not treat oil the way we treated, cocoa revenue, other revenue. So we put a PRMA in place. And the PRMA is saying, we had a provision in the Constitution, it's a constitutional provision, that we should set up a contingency fund. The 1992 Constitution has it. The sinking fund is in the Constitution. That one has made. But the contingency fund is not optional. So with the opportunity of new money coming into the budget, that's when you start doing new things. That's when you start maturing. Some countries go through this. I recall that when we were setting up the sinking fund, we spoke to Philippines, which had a BBB market, bond rating. And we met and we were in a breakfast, let me just, quickly. And they overheard us talking about this in Washington, about what we were doing. And somebody was listening and said, you need to talk to Philippines. The treasurer is here. And we spoke to her because what you are talking about, Philippines does it very well. And he said, you have oil revenue. We don't have oil revenue. So this is the best opportunity for you to set up a sinking fund. That's where we got, the encouragement. Now, from one oil field, we have 3 oil fields. From 70,000 barrels average to nearly 200,000 barrels per day, right? If you continue to put, all this money into consumption, what opportunity do you expect again? This money was, definitely new, and we all came to the realization that we have to do things, in a new way, right? So it's a policy choice whether we want to put the money into consumption or we want to pay down our debt so that we can borrow because no country, every country borrows. The US is going to borrow. The taxes that they are going to increase, they'll borrow first, and then they'll use the taxes to pay, right? But if you don't have the wherewithal to pay, right? And so the oil revenue is new. Now we have nearly 200,000 barrels per day. You can push all of them into consumption, just as other African countries, and you will be like them. Or you can decide that, like, the Middle Eastern countries. When I was doing my postgraduate, you couldn't do a course in finance without petrodollar. Petrodollar means petroleum revenue that goes to the Western economies. And so the smart, young people who were in the West and in China and the rest, let's talk to the Middle East, decided to make Dubai a financial center. Where the money was going. We all see, when you go to Dubai, you see that map where they came from and where they are today. So these ideas, they are not new. They are things which countries do, and we just have to also do it, but it requires sacrifice. It requires putting money into, these instruments. They are called sovereign wealth funds, if you want to know. And that's why we asked Norway to come and help us. CSOs are here. Norway, help us. In fact, Trinidad and Tobago, which is establishing a bank here, came to help us, right? Nigeria came to help us. And Nigeria has set up a sovereign wealth fund as a result of following what we did. Angola just announced that they were going to set up one. So even the African countries which were not doing these things are beginning to do it. So why do we backslide, after we have done this? So quickly, therefore, with 3 oil fields, we can do it. If we just stop putting money, everything into consumption. Now, marking debt to project, that is what we call the self-financing. That's what we call the self-financing. And the good examples are 2. Terminal 3 is being paid for from airport tax. So the airport tax that used to go into the consolidated fund, and the airport tax, that went to civil aviation, we put them together.
On their own,
yes,
sheet.
to finance, yes. And we said, if you get Terminal 3, airport company will be able to get other fees and things from Terminal 3 to pay for their workers. It's really it is a tax. So it was ring-fenced. And that is what we didn't use a sovereign guarantee for that when we put that mechanism in place. The same with the thermal port. It's being paid from port dues, demurrage, and all those, which are in Forex anyway. These are in Forex, right? So yes, we did implement it. That's the self-financing. KJTI was supposed to be self-financing, to be paid, and part of the money was to go to KMA to develop, more markets as an initiative for the municipal bond, and then later on to go into the cities and others, right? So yes, we did implement that. Contingency fund, I said, is a constitutional provision, and we should have to do it. Mobile phones, yes, it can be used to make payments. For example, presumptive taxes by, and I think GRA is
actually, the GRA has implemented a platform where you can pay,
your taxes, yes,
online. And actually, I have experienced that where you can pay to your business operating permit, yes, even to your. And the national identification number is going to help. These are all things which, and Kenya and the rest are far ahead with this. The African countries, by the way, so at least we can say that once an African country has done something, we should also be able to do it. 2 questions before we wrap up, please. So 1 and 2. I'm sure you can give Mr. Teko your question afterwards. All right. So
it sounds like been up for a long time. Maybe we can add.
Who's that? Okay. All right. 3. And then we need to wrap up. Otherwise, the production team will have my head. All right. Please go ahead. Sorry, can you speak up?
So,
yeah,
we are aware that GRA has come up with some reforms, and you mentioned some of them. One of them is the tax courts, and they are in line with the judiciary to establish those kind of courts. But here's the case: some industry players, specifically the private sector, the Private Enterprise Federation, they have raised concerns with the effectiveness of such courts. So their concern is that it's going to hurt revenue generation. And also the problem is about simplification of the tax laws, not prosecuting offenders. So what he said is also in line with the recent Afrobarometer report on taxes, which says that people are willing to pay the tax, but they don't know what and how they are going to pay. So from where you sit, what's your view on these tax costs vis-a-vis the views of these industry players and the Afrobarometer report? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir. There's one person, there are two people. So we'll give the gentleman in the blue face mask, and then he'll pass it on to the gentleman in the black face mask.
Okay, Mr. Tekwe, please, on using a sinking fund to pay down debts, I'd like to know how much exactly do you think government should commit to paying annually so that it pays down or it reduces the debt to the acceptable 60% debt to GDP levels for middle income countries? And also, with regards to fiscal deficit, per your presentation, it seems fiscal deficit will be on an elevated path because the government will be borrowing more and then tax revenue won't be able to keep up. So I would like to know, over the medium term, how bad is the country's fiscal deficit going to be? And if you could give a projection, say at the end of 2024, where we are going to be in terms of the fiscal deficit level. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And then one more question. So, Mr. Tekwe, when you are answering his question on using the sinking fund to pay down debt, can you please relate it one more time to the zero bond coupon which we are to retire in 2025? Because what I recall you've said before is that we've used the sinking fund approach to retire debt that was incurred during the Kufuor administration. So give us what time frame that we can use then to draw down the zero coupon debt. Yes, sir, go ahead.
My name is Jabba Ibrahim Mohammed. I'm from University of Professional Studies, Accra. I don't really have a question, but I have some few contributions to make as well.
Okay, can we
I'm
make
going
it
to be very
quick?
brief.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Looking at the PRMA, the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, is one of the best acts you can find, and if not in the world, but among African countries. In terms of the stabilization fund, it's very critical that nations build stabilization funds. And even in the advanced countries like the UK, the argument is that if UK has started building up a sovereign wealth fund, by today they will have enough money that they can use it to support their budget for so many years. So building the stabilization fund was actually meant so that if the revenue dries out in the near future, because the geological anticipation is that by 25 years' time, our oil revenue might have, or oil resources might have dried up. So the stabilization fund was meant to support that, and also to try to leverage our debt. When your debts are going high, you can rely on it to try to take it out, and also to smoothen consumption. Now, if you come to the presentation Mr. Tekwe made, coming into the what do you call it? The banks, the bank bailout and other stuff. The argument is that government is going to tax the banks 5% to pay off the what do you call it? The financial sector cleanup exercise, which is like going back to what was introduced initially, like taxing the financial sector to support the budget. So what do you make of it? What do you think? Do you think that 5% taxation is going to be another burden, like they used to see that taxes that we're placing on financial services was costing financial services? Do you think that 5% is still going to cost financial services? And the last question I want to ask is about the 70% of our tax revenue is used in payment of interest and compensation. What measures can government put in place to ensure that we can reduce the amount of compensation that we have, or even to reduce our interest payments in such a way that it can support and reduce our budgetary pressure?
All right. Thank you very much, sir. So, Mr. Tekwe, over to you. So, one is about the financial services tax, and the other is about how do we reduce the amount of money we pay on interest and compensation.
Yeah, financial services tax. The problem with the financial services tax is that it is topping the financial services tax. Let's use the right term, the fiscal levy that was imposed back in 2015. So in actual fact, we should have been taken off when we moved into the Sankofa 10 era. And therefore it's going to eat into the profits for the banks. I think we should set sunset clauses, for these temporary taxes so that they go off, in about 3 years, as we have done, as I said, for every administration faces crisis and they have always done it, right? So with 3 oil fields, if we're going to, as part of the recovery program, and we should put sunset clauses on the ESLA and on all these, so that, they go away because they hurt industry. There was a point that was made, it's true. The first opposition, I remember, when I said something to the effect that there should be no jubilation because, the then VAT measures that were being announced, it's no relief. The first, came from AGI and from the Chamber of Commerce when cement and other prices started to go up. Practically, that's what it means. So we should be mindful of the sectors when, tax cut. Actually, the tax cut initiative was not implemented. It was implemented, but instead of the explicit tax cut, the judiciary was then putting the commercial costs in place. And the argument back then was, tax is commercial, basically, right? And that's how come they were being administered. I'm here to talk to TUC because sometimes you need to see their perspective because it's a well-researched institution, actually. I always say that. It's a compliment to TUC. Their research department do a lot of research, before they come out. So I'm here to talk to them to find out, where they are coming from. I think the TUC and some other.
Yeah, the tax cuts, that's the GRA is driving that.
It's in many countries.
Yes.
And that's what I said. It was going to be a tax cut, but it was thought that it should be taken over by the.
Yes, but now.
So now an exclusive.
Now they are setting up. They have notification.
That's what happens
from the Chief Justice.
Exactly. So, maybe it's a maturing process. They now probably think that it should be given, and that is done in many countries. And in fact, the beauty of the tax court in many countries is that sometimes you can be represented by non-lawyers in many countries. Your accountant can go with you, or a friend of the court, as we normally say. You can just walk in. If you cannot afford the fees, they are made, to interact, to make it easy for, if you think that GRA is harassing you and whatever, small businesses, and I don't have the wherewithal, it's a friendly court. And
so
it
won't deter people from paying their taxes as the gentleman suggested,
no,
because people may not want to get caught up in that process.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's not just GRA that can go to the court. In fact, in many countries, taxpayers go to the court, to protest against GRA, than GRA going, to court with them. So if a tax official in some district is, the district court, tax courts, when the court in the district is sitting, as a tax court, and the judges and things are trained, you can go to the registrar and book and you'll be heard. So that the cost is very low.
So it's not caught in the adversarial form that we would typically imagine.
No, it's just like a tenant can go to the rent court, for example, and that's it. So it plays on both ways. And the resistance should not be seen as enabling only GRA to. No, it's a friendly court, and the panel is normally made up of accountants, businessmen, and I don't know the structure.
We don't have enough details, so yes. I think in the days ahead.
But the experience in many countries is that the tax court, yes, it won't have a lawyer on it, but it has accountants, it has. Sometimes even some countries allow businessmen to be on it because they can empathize with, the person who is coming, Okay.
So
the sinking fund.
You have 2 minutes, then we need to wrap up.
So the sinking fund, actually, the cap on the stabilization fund, if it has not been changed, specifies what should go to the sinking fund. And so when you cap it, 90% at the time was to go into the sinking fund, for debt service, and 10% only to the contingency fund. because the PRMA has the provision. The PRMA says that when you cap the stabilization fund, you can use it only for debt service and for contingency. And contingency means under the Constitution, not the budget constitution, you know. So the law is already there. It's in the PRMA itself. You know, so I think it can be. The infrastructure fund, in fact, the funny thing is that when we set up the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund, which was to take care of the self-financing, you know, because it has to be for commercial, you know, not long after, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Fund was set up, led by China for the Asian countries. And then the UK started thinking about an infrastructure fund. You know, many countries started, the UK and others, right? Because, you know, financing this infrastructure routinely from the budget means that the budget takes a hit. You know, but the thing about the infrastructure fund is that you groom it, you know, to be the one to borrow. But we should also learn from the experiences of Malaysia, you know, and I think recently Angola, where it was also abused, right? So we have to put the right mechanism. And in our infrastructure fund, you know, law, you know, some of those things are there. Yeah.
All right. And that is where we have to bring this to an end. I want to say thanks to Mr. Tekpe for making time for the maiden PFM Dialogue series, and the plan is to have this quarterly. So I hope that the next quarter there will be something very interesting to discuss. Today's topic was the 2021 budget, what next? And I think what we've been told is that essentially we need to reduce our expenditure, we need to improve revenue mobilization as well. We want to say thanks to the Natural Resource Governance Institute for supporting this dialogue as well. We want to say thanks to everyone who's also made time to be here and everyone who's asked questions, those who've joined us via Zoom and watched on Facebook as well and sent your comments. Thank you very much. We want to say thanks to our production team as well as our media colleagues who've spent the morning with us covering this. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon. My name is Jifa Bampo.